Good morning and welcome to Monday. I'm not gonna lie, I probably have been sitting here for like 15-20 minutes trying to figure out what to talk about today. Sometimes they come easy, sometimes they don't. But we figured it out, and here we are. So today, to be offended or not to be offended. So this is something that comes up a lot on my feed, in conversation, in the news. It's everywhere. It's really crazy how like everywhere it is. And Marvel's having a good time back there. So there's a lot to this, and I'm going to try to be fairly brief with most of it. So we've all heard that term snowflakes. So it is supposed to describe somebody who is so sensitive to everything, they're always offended. And I have mixed feelings about this, because it's kind of led to this whole idea that we're not supposed to be offended by anything. By we, I mean people. Because yes, there are things to be offended about, and yes, there are things that you really should not be offended about. And then there's things in between that are kind of can go either way. And it is going to change based on a lot of stuff, because I might not be offended by something, but if I'm in a really bad mood or I've just about had enough of that kind of behavior, I might get offended by it that one time. And so there's a lot of things to take into consideration. So let's dig into this a little bit. Part of what this is there's a lot of things that are, and I'm going to blank out on terminology this morning because it's Monday. Nope. I was going to look for the word. It's not going to come. But politically correct. There we go. And it was going to come eventually. This whole idea of political correctness. Now, I'm going to do my best to kind of keep everybody in consideration, but understand I don't know everything. Blue, you need to quit your shit or you're going to end up on camera. There's a cat in my lap. So, and it's been, political correctness has been something that's been covered in a lot of like comedian stand-up pieces. It's something that we've talked about a lot in different ways, as jokes, as serious, and it's just kind of this idea that you have to be, to a certain extent, correct about certain things in the way that you say things. Marble! Don't make me get up. Cat parenting. And lately with political correctness, there has been this whole part of it that has been getting people upset, and I think has been leading to this whole idea of a snowflake. And part of it is the LGBT community has groups of people that do not identify as a woman, or they don't identify as a man, and they have varying degrees of pronouns. He, she, and they, them. So there's all of these ideas of how people want to be referred to. And in something that way, I guess the way I think about it is, what do you want to be called? And we move on. When people refer to me, it's she, her. That's fine with me. And it doesn't affect me. But if somebody wants to be referred to as he, him, and you're going to be very insistent on saying her, she, and her, then they obviously don't want to talk to you. They don't want to be around you because you don't respect their decisions. And I'm going to end up having to kick both of you out. Get out of here. They're apparently very awake this morning. And that's their right. If you want to be referred to a certain way, and the people that are around you refuse, you don't have to keep being around them. And to a certain extent, it's understandable, but then you think about it. And if you keep doing this to them, and you refuse to acknowledge them the way that they want, after a while they're going to get upset and they're going to start yelling about it. it's the same for a lot of things. There are varying like nicknames and references to race that eventually people got upset about and said, you gotta quit that. So if I had a nickname that I really didn't like, and I kept telling people not to use it and tried to avoid people who would use this nickname, eventually I'm just gonna get mad and start yelling at people and be like, you gotta quit it. And I don't care at that point if we're just joking around or we're just messing with it because we're friends, we all understand. There is no explanation by this point that you're going to give me that's going to make me less upset, because, and you might get all offended and might say that I'm being overly sensitive because you were joking, but you have to realize that how many times has it happened before that? Before this time that I decided, nope, that's enough. And that's just with the nickname. This is people's lifestyles, choices. This is what, or who they are. These are varying things like that. It could be race related. I don't want to be referred to by any sort of racial slurs. That's just not something that is okay with me. And if you think it's cute or you think it's funny, I don't. And I don't want that to be the way people refer to me, because I don't like it and I don't want any part of it. People who have specific pronouns they want used, use it or don't talk to them, because that is their choice. And I understand that maybe at some point you made a mistake and it was a genuine mistake, but they got really mad. It might not be about you at that point. It might be about all of the people who came before you who did it intentionally because they didn't respect their choices or who they are. They probably got this all built up in them, and then finally you just happened to be the straw that broke the camel's back at this point. So that's a little bit more understandable, and I get that. Then there's this other aspect that really upsets me, and that's that we get upset about everything. Yes and no. So I'm always really kind of angry and frustrated with all of the things that I feel like I have to do to feel safe, to feel secure, to feel okay. And I kind of make a big deal about it sometimes. So like, I can't feel like I can go out and have a drink without being overly paranoid. I gotta make sure that I never put my drink down. I gotta make sure that I'm not too provocative, but I still want to feel like I'm dressed up to look nice. Or I have to be careful with who's around me, and I have to be careful who's like following to the parking lot, or if I need to walk to the parking lot with somebody else, and all of these sorts of things that after a while I get really upset about it. And I can go on various rants, and I've talked about it a little bit on my blog. And sometimes it sounds like I'm being overly sensitive, and it's been used in that sense. And it's not that I'm offended, it's that I'm upset with the way that things are, and I want them to change. And Marble's digging the sheets. I'm just going to be very distracted by these cats today. But that is not one way that we should be using this whole offended thing. Because to be offended by certain things like racial slurs or people not respecting you and the decisions that you've made, yes, you have a right to be offended because people are insulting you. To refer to me being offended by the way that men treat me or the way that employers treat me, that is also a justifiable way to be offended. There are a lot of reasons to be offended, and people are continuously dismissing it in varying degrees. People are dismissing it because they don't agree with your life choices, and they get offended because of your life choices. That's not a reason to be offended. There are people who are offended because you're getting upset over something that they've had to put up with for years, and it's not that bad. No. We aren't just getting offended over things that don't matter. And this is not... Yes, there are going to be exceptions to that rule, but for the majority of the time, every time I look at these things, we're not getting offended over nothing. If you are being disrespected you get offended. That is a thing. But if you feel like you're getting offended because somebody else's choices don't line up with yours, how does that make sense? Everybody makes their own choices. Your choices don't line up with theirs, and they're not getting offended. And then there's all of this, well, that's the way things have always been. No. People have only ever been living in all of these different societies for a very small portion of the existence of the earth. So things have not always been this way. We can look back a couple of hundred years and things were totally different. There were times in Greek history where there was all of these women being, laying down for naked portraits, and then there was a time where women had to cover up all the way to their neck. They had to wear the hats, the everything, couldn't show an ounce of skin. There were times where men wore heels and makeup, and then there was a time where men shouldn't wear heels and makeup. And everything is constantly changing. So this idea that this is the way that things have always been is so wrong. We're continuously supposed to grow and change, and the things that shouldn't be, like women being treated unequally, like people not being able to make their own choices and marry who they want or do the things that they want, that isn't harming anybody else. This idea that, climate change, it's not an idea, it's a fact. And we're trying to fix it because we've made mistakes up to this point. Maybe we didn't know enough, maybe we didn't care enough, and we're trying to change these things. Those things need to be acknowledged and moved forward with. And they're not things that you get to be offended about, because we're changing and we're trying to better society. Things like race being issues different places. So if I should feel just as comfortable as somebody of a different race, that shouldn't even be a factor, but it is. And you don't get to be offended by that. It's a fact. This is what it is. There are issues that need to be changed, things that need to get better. And so this whole, should I be offended by this? Should I not be offended by this? You kind of get to feel the way you want, yes. But starting to call people names like snowflakes because they're offended by a lot of things isn't okay, because you're just making fun of a group of people who are trying to make things better sometimes, are trying to call attention to an issue on other times, and there's just all of these things that we are trying to do. So I had this discussion with my husband yesterday about, he doesn't like all of these like big awareness things, like the whole Black Lives Matters, Blue Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, all like things like those movements that are trying to call attention to something. His biggest thing was, well, why can't we just find solutions? And I was like, and I've kind of mentioned this before, that I don't have the answer to everything. But maybe if we keep talking about it, maybe one of the people who watch this, that hear an issue that I talk about, figure out what the answer is. Or maybe if enough people recognize that this is a problem, we can get the right people to the table to come to a solution. And that's what I was explaining to him. I was like, look, the first part of fixing something is to acknowledge that there is a problem. And there's all of these things that can get in the way of people recognizing a problem. I've had a lot of things popping up in my memories feed lately about men not recognizing sometimes the issues that women face. So one of the more recent ones was in class, professor was asking his class, all the men, what do you do on a regular basis to prevent yourself from being sexually assaulted or harassed? And they really couldn't think of anything until finally somebody stood up and said, well, I've never really thought about it. Or they made jokes about it, like, well, I just avoid going to prison. And then they asked the same question to all the women, and the list was nearly endless. Everybody had something, whether it was holding keys in their hand, whether it was keeping an eye on their drink, whether it was making sure they didn't dress a certain way, whether it was putting headphones in or not putting headphones in when they're running, and so on and so forth. And this just made all of the people in the room that much more aware of this issue. They weren't complaining. They were bringing attention to this issue that these guys would have otherwise not known. That is basically what people try to do when they start to create these movements, is to bring awareness to an issue. We're not trying to be overly sensitive. We're not trying to complain and ruin whatever it is you think you've got. We are trying to call attention to an issue so that the right people can get into the room and fix it. No, they might not get it right on the first try. They might not get it right on the second try. The point is that we're trying to fix this issue. And the list goes on for all of these things. Things that maybe the reasons for bathrooms, wanting them to be gender neutral, like here's a room, here's a toilet, here's the sink, and it's just whoever wants to use this one, and there's more than one. I can walk into the women's restroom, do my business, and leave, and not really think about it. Not everybody has that luxury. There's people that will use the women's restroom that everybody gives them a dirty look. I remember reading a story that it was this person went into the women's restroom, and a mom saw them, freaked out, and I think she maced him or pepper sprayed him, and got really mad and left and told him that this was not the right restroom for him. And then this person made a post that said, look, to the mom who pepper sprayed me in the bathroom, here's a picture of my ID. Legally, I am a woman. I personally would be more comfortable in the men's room. Part of that reason is because of your reaction. But I can't, because there's all of these laws about it. To those people, they just want to use the restroom, and they can't. Because they're not allowed to use, this person wasn't allowed to use the men's restroom, but when they went to the women's restroom, this mom freaked out and maced them. That's not something I worry about, but that is something that other people worry about. And I'm not offended that they're bringing this up or trying to change things all of a sudden. Good for them. They're trying to make the world better for them. And it's not that they're being offended by everything, they just want to feel safe doing the things that everybody else gets to do. And there are places like Starbucks, they've always had 2 different restrooms, and it was just labeled one was the guys, one was the girls. This issue came up, they just took off the labeling and just said, this is the restroom, use it. Solved the problem. Now, which one is the men's, which one is the women's, it doesn't matter. It's just a restroom, it has the same thing in both. And both genders can use it. Or whatever you've got. There's a toilet, use it. And it's something as simple as that sometimes, yet there's all of these people who will get offended by this idea, and so on and so forth. Why? It doesn't change how I use the restroom. I just don't have to look which one's which now. And if you're in a club and there is no which one's which, you just have to figure out if it's busy or not. If you're really drunk, that's a really great thing, because you don't have to worry about walking in the wrong one. But there's just all of these things that people are trying to change, and it keeps getting dismissed by things like being offended, being a snowflake. And that's what really upsets me. Because it's not always, I'm getting offended by everything all of a sudden. It's that I'm trying to bring attention to an issue that needs addressing. And it doesn't have to be your issue for you to support them. And there is differences. And one of the biggest arguments for this whole restroom thing was, well, you know, guys are going to go into the women's restroom whenever they want to attack women. That's not why we want this. And if that is an issue that's going to come up, maybe we should address that as its own issue. Why are guys thinking that they can go into a women's restroom and attack them? That sounds like a different issue. It sounds like an issue like sexual harassment and sexual assaults. Now, I'm not saying that women don't do it too, I'm saying that a larger percentage of men do it. And if you're not one of those guys, instead of being offended by this fact, change it. If that was the fact for women, that suddenly all of us were the ones doing all of the assaulting, I'd be really upset by this. Not because I'm offended as a woman, but because that shouldn't be happening at all. And that's part of this whole thing that I'm talking about. Instead of immediately jumping to being offended, what if we jumped to, how do I fix it? I don't want to carry the labels of being offended all the time. So what do I do to change it? I'm trying to bring awareness to it. If I was part of a group that was doing a lot of bad things, I'd try to change that, fix that. What if we changed it from being offended by all of these things? Like, men are always sexual assault. No, let's bring out the facts and then let's try to fix that. Why? Is it because they're getting raised differently? Is it because... And then instead of being offended, we're fixing a problem so that you don't have to hear it anymore. Food for thought. Thanks for listening.